Everyone, Dave Floss here with Mentally Unbalanced and Prometheus Falling Toys, and today I'm going to demonstrate the Haslab Unicron retrofit pack that allows you to display your Unicron in both robot and planet mode. So stick around. So last year saw the release of the Haslab Unicron Transformer in the War for Cybertron series, the largest transformer ever to be released by Hasbro. And there was a lot of anticipation, as this was almost 2 years from when the crowdfunding first kicked off to when they started to ship across the world. Now, as a recipient of this, I was very excited. Unicron is already an epic type of figure, so to get him in this size and scale and detail was definitely something I was looking forward to. Now, prior to that, there was actually a Hasbro release of the Unicron figure. It was good for the time, but it left a little bit to be desired, especially when in the last few years we have seen some truly really cool and really innovative Transformers coming out, and a whole slew of everything from studio series to movie series, all of these other Transformers coming out of Hasbro. So it made perfect sense that Haslab would choose the Destroyer of Worlds to be one of its Haslab projects that it was going to fund. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't some issues, and there's been a number of issues. I even have another video about some of the issues leading up to and after the release of the Haslab Unicron. There's been a few feelings and opinions about some of the changes that were made throughout the process. But the biggest one for me, more than the color scheme of this or how the connectivity of that, was really about the fact that in planet mode, this figure looks awesome. It is large, it is epic, it commands the space that it's in. Now, in robot mode, it's big, it's detailed, but almost all of that stuff that goes into making it the planet mode is, well, it's basically just kibble. It's a huge backpack. It's chunky stuff on the legs. Now, if we look, for example, at the Studio Cell Unicron, and we just take a quick peek, you can see how overall so many of these components that would have gone into making the planet mode are very well integrated into the robot mode. So the planet mode is, for lack of a better expression, truly hidden while it's in robot mode, and it is a gorgeous looking figure. Now, it does have a few pieces that need to be added on the after the fact, but I don't have a problem with that, because ultimately, whether I'm displaying it in planet or robot mode, I want them to look the best as possible. Now, we look at Haslab Unicron, and in robot mode, I'm going to have to show a picture first, so let's just take a look out of the box in robot mode. Let's take a look at the picture. Let's look at some of the details about the extra planet components that need to be added to the back. Basically a big backpack. Around the legs, a lot of kibble, a lot of chunk going on in those legs. It is not nearly as sleek and clean and impressive looking as the Studio Cell version. So let's now take a look at Unicron, the Haslab Unicron, when we've removed those items. So right away, we've removed the entire backpack section of components. We've removed all of the leg folding planet mode components. The only thing left, which I'm debating removing as well, is this other piece here that is used to actually lock and hold those pieces in place. It serves no other real purpose. But once we remove all of that kibble, we get a much nicer silhouette of this figure. So it of course begs the question, if the planet mode is mostly just shell, when it's in planet mode, there are almost no components of the actual figure that go into planet mode, right? And we can even name off just a couple of them. You have the protrusions on the arms, or the arm spikes when in robot mode, and then in planet mode, when this is folded and properly configured, that is how the ring surrounds, and they connect at these points here. Secondly, the stand, the actual large, massive plastic stand to support all of that weight, is built into the back of the actual figure. But besides that and a couple other very small details, very little of this figure actually comprises the planet mode. It really is just kind of hiding inside, like a chicken inside of an egg. So what you're left with, if you remove these items, is almost a complete planet for Unicron. Now the challenge is that without some other mechanism or components to basically give it some structure and some support, you really can't just put these pieces back together and say, look, planet mode. The rings won't have a mechanism to attach. There's no way to attach it to the base. And that is where Mad Props comes in. Mad Props has come out with an online self-print component pack that corrects for all of those issues I just mentioned. We can take a look at some of those components here. So there's a few different components that I'm going to highlight. The first one is it comes with a support base that connects directly to the included Unicron base. This support base then has a number of other pieces that create a framework or a skeleton inside of your Haslab Unicron Planet. Lastly, we have a couple other pieces on the ends. We have adapters that allow for the planet ring to reconnect. We have a couple of these things basically called mushroom adapters. These are going to go in the framework, and I'll show you that in just a moment, that allow it to attach and connect to the frame and the shell of Unicron, give it some support and hold that shape. We have a replacement back plate. So the one piece that is missing, if you tried to put all these pieces together, is a large gap in the back of Unicron. That is normally filled up by, well, the back of the actual toy Unicron or the robot mode of Unicron. So a replacement back plate, which also connects not only to the frame and the shell of Unicron at the top and bottom, but has an opening in the middle where it's going to connect into this support structure to give it that added bit of rigidity. And then lastly, a little bit harder to display, but I'll tilt it here, is that when you start putting your planet mode together, there's also an extra clip that you print that allows you to basically attach the two back halves together, adding some support. Anyone who's tried to put any part of the Unicron Planet Mode together without its original robot inside will know it can be very challenging. There's a number of pieces that go in that by themselves have to be laid out and snapped in correctly, and then trying to attach those to the various other parts can be very challenging. In fact, you'll notice, and here's basically tip number one, is as you're doing this, if on either a table, you might want to get some towels or something where you can create a bit of a ring structure that'll keep the main body supported, right, and keep it from rolling around or sliding, because you will be putting a little bit of pressure as you're starting to snap these pieces back together. Now, fortunately, I had an old globe, which came with a globe stand, and I was able to use that as a perfect fit for my Haslab Unicron as I'm putting it back together. All right, so we're going to start putting together our Unicron Planet Mode using the components. Now, first of all, let me point a couple things out. In order to accomplish this, you're going to need three things. Now, before you even get to those three things, of course, you have to have the Haslab Unicron with all of its parts, right? Can't build it without it. But if you have Haslab Unicron, you're going to ultimately need three things to be successful. The first is you're going to need the files, which I'll put a link to. They're not our files, but they are available at no charge from a couple websites in STL format. So you're going to need the files. Secondly, you're going to need a 3D printer. And ultimately, you're going to need a decent sized 3D printer. For example, the Ender 3, which is what we use to print all of the components that you're going to see today. And ultimately, that is because most of these components are fairly large in size. Now, they are broken out very nicely to be able to be printed individually right within the general size of the Ender 3 plate size. But if you have a smaller 3D printer, you're either going to have to cut these items into multiple parts and then assemble them, or find some way to use an adhesive or something else to give them back their rigidity, or ideally you want to print them in their original shapes and sizes. Lastly, you're going to need patience. The number of components that are being printed here took a few days. And there's a couple reasons it took a few days. One, we wanted the optimal quality. Visually, they did not need to look great. These are going to be hidden inside the body of Unicron. But we wanted them to fit and attach and assemble correctly. And ultimately for that, we went with fairly precise settings so that we knew these items would fit. And they truly do. With very little adjustment, maybe just a little bit of light sanding on a couple pieces, all of these pieces snap together really well. They're snug, they fit, they feel very good as far as the measurements and the way that they were set up. Even the back plate, which we'll demonstrate soon, the attention to detail that went into this, I think is excellent, and ultimately that has led us to what looks to be a very promising option. So once you have the items printed, I highly suggest before you start assembling anything, do your test fits. Make sure all of your pieces fit together well. There's a nice instructional video provided by the person who created them. So I'm not going to go into the exact assembly. We're going to show you how it works once we get it into Unicron himself. So we're going to start with our stand, the Unicron stand that came with the figure. So with the Unicron stand in place, the first thing we do is we set the bottom mold, which we have assembled. As I mentioned earlier, we used a globe stand to help give it some strength, but we've assembled the bottom. Inside, in the back, if you can see it, I'm covering it in here. This is one of the other pieces that you will print, and this snaps together in the back to give it some strength and support, and allows you to open up the flap where the stand goes through. So we're going to go ahead and set that now. And let me make sure, this is where I always tend to get hung up, is making sure I'm facing the right way. We're going to face the little gray part to the front. We're going to slide Unicron, and we're going to very gently just lay him down like that. All right, now we have our Unicron lower half sitting gently within. Now, I should note also at this time that in order to make this work, you do need to remove some of these pieces from the Unicron body. That may involve removing screws, so just bear that in mind. There are a few screws that need to be removed. I also, even though you don't technically need to remove it from the Unicron body, also remove the 2 screws located here, which normally would attach to the entire top half flap. I find it much easier to work with when I'm dealing with this in 2 distinct halves without all that extra material in the middle, especially as I'm putting together the inner components. So now let's start with those inner components. I have taken the multiple pieces and attached them following the instructions, including the replacement or the augmented plate that is going to sit and slide directly on our stand. So we see that now, and of course it's considerably higher. I'm also going to go right now and I'm going to add the back plate to this. I'm just going to push, and again, really good. I'm really happy with the quality of the print, but also really very impressed with the attention to detail that clearly went into designing this. Now, one of the items that's going to definitely be a little bit harder to see is that once these are in place, there are 2 nubs on either side of these small protrusions going down to the bottom. So with that said, there are these little, what they call mushroom clips. And they are going to snap in the side here. I'll do one and then the other. And they should slide in relatively easily. Oh, you know what? It does help if I put them in the right way. And I will do the other side. And what these clips are going to attach to is part of the frame inside of Unicron. So as I lift Unicron almost into place and line up those mushroom clips, they should snap right into place. All right, well, you may be wondering now why the sudden change of environment, the wardrobe change, why the jump cut? Well, the short answer is, while assembling the first draft of my pieces, I broke them. They broke. So there are 2 mushroom clips that go inside and attach to the frame inside of Unicron. I'm going to try to twist this here just a little bit and see if you get in there, these little clips right here, and they are what connect to the frame of the base of Unicron, the outer shell of Unicron. I did these in PLA, and as soon as I tried attaching them, and because they actually support a good deal of the weight on each side, they're basically supporting the center mass of Unicron, they broke apart pretty easily. Now, I did them originally in PLA. You can kind of see here they just, you know, I'm going to call it down to the quality of my print. They fit perfectly, but given the small amount of infill, the hollowness of these pieces, they just did not hold up structurally. So I'm going to say there's probably two ways that you could potentially get around this. The first is, well, reprint them in PLA, use a much denser infill to make them. They're not very big, so you're not talking about a great deal of material, but you're going to want them to be fairly solid, very structurally solid when complete. For me, what I ended up doing, since I have access to a resin printer, I actually did them as complete solid resin hard pieces, much more structurally capable. The measurements still were perfect. They fit inside of the rest of the frame without issue, and they snapped directly to the pieces inside of Unicron without a problem. And now that I have put that together, and I'm going to move my rings. My rings are right in my way, always. I will twist around and show right here that with those snapped in place, that one snapped in, and now the back plate snapped into the base of Unicron here, it is fairly solid. Now I keep tapping, knocking into it. That's my fault. But once it's all in place and snapped together, it offers a good deal of support. Now here's my first observation, is that those two mushroom clips attaching to the base here, and that base of course then comes and attaches to the stand in the center. It has a piece of frame going out to the back that attaches to the back, offers very good support for the center and the back, but there's a lot of front weight, and it might be hard to tell, but even fully assembled, I see that my Unicron wants to kind of lean forward. If I hold it back, then I let go, it's kind of tilting a little bit. Now that might be addressed when I get the rest of the shell together to give it some added stability, but right now it definitely means I need to be kind of thoughtful and careful with the assembly to not knock into it. One, to not loosen or break off these clips again, and just so of course I don't damage the shell of Unicron in general. So with that said, we now have the entire inner structure, skeleton, fully assembled and attached at its various points to the Unicron Planet Mode shell. So the next step is going to be attaching the two side arms. Now there are two side arms that go to each side. These side arms serve two functions. One, they're going to allow me to attach the side spikes to the model, and they are going to provide the inputs for me to attach the ring once I'm ready to attach my ring. So let's start with attaching these on either end. Now I am noticing these are fitting fairly loosely. Again, that could just be the print. Everything else fit extremely snug and worked extremely well, and it might have even been the intent that these don't need to be very firmly placed, but I'm noticing right away they kind of, unlike the other pieces which are pretty firm, these kind of just slide on. They're not they're fairly loose. They don't snap or there's not a lot of tension there, so just bear that in mind. Also, I did these in PLA, and kind of similar to the mushroom clips, I definitely have a couple, I'll call it minor concerns about the overall structural capabilities. I'm already seeing this one kind of coming apart. Again, that's a result of my print. The print didn't turn out exactly as I would have wanted. Now, I'm going to go ahead and try to assemble it in that condition. I don't expect these are going to be supporting a great deal of weight, unlike the rest or the mushroom clips, which have to support almost all the weight. So I'm not sure that that structural challenge is going to actually be a problem, but we're going to have to wait and see. Could be another jump cut and another wardrobe change. We don't know. All right, so I have my structure in place. I have my outer rings in place. All of my spikes are in place. The next pieces to go on are going to be the top half of the shell. Now, for this, I'm going to do it in two pieces. First, I took the top part of the shell and one side and assembled it already. So these are already in place. And then I'm going to want to line that up. In this case, it's going to go on this side. The back of the shell has two clips that match up with two slots. Let's So I'm going to want to line that up and snap those into place. We've got the other side of the outer shell on. Let's place on the last piece of the shell, which is going to be a combination of connecting on the front and back. So now with all of the internal framework completely attached, and we've now reattached the outer shell, we have our Unicron. So let's start with the last piece then, the real piece that gives its visual appeal, and that's going to be the outer ring. So let's start with bringing our ring around here. We'll slide that gently in the top. Again, I'm trying real hard not to put any weight or pressure on this at this point. And then I'm going to slide the two side adapters in like so, which they fit very nicely. And then lastly, come around the bottom and snap in the bottom portion of the ring. So now the item is fully assembled, and as you can see, we have a very nice Unicron Planet Mode sans Unicron. There's no Unicron inside of it. If we slowly turn, and I really want to talk now just kind of the visual pieces that are involved. So the two side rings come out, so you can see them here as well. I did them in black. It was really just the material I had, but inevitably worked really well. It doesn't stand out. It's just a small ring of black on each side, which of course I could decide if I wanted to color change or paint to match the rings, but doesn't jump out. So that might be a consideration when you're printing your own, is think about the color of the material you use, and will you require to paint it, or will it work on its own? Now, if we roll to the back, the most visible piece is going to be this back plate, which of course is critical, structurally speaking, to fill in that space as well as add some stability to the inner framework. Now this one was done in blue, definitely does not match the rest of Unicron. And again, I'll either determine if I want to try to color match this. I could reprint it in a different color that maybe doesn't stand out as much, or ultimately if it's going to be against a wall and no one's ever going to see it, I might just leave it alone. There is one piece that is missing. I want to point that out. There's one piece that I didn't do. There is another piece you can print that will fill in the channel with some additional spikes. I honestly forgot. I forgot to print it. I was so excited about putting it together. I didn't print it. But if you did have this on in an area where it's highly visible from all angles, you can absolutely fill in that back piece, in which case you'll probably want to color match it to the color as best as possible to the rings and the spikes so that it doesn't stand out on its own. So now we have this lovely Planet Mode displayed, and we can have our Unicron displayed right next to it. Really, really nice, really nice. Not perfect, not perfect. Ran into a couple issues. Already can see a couple, I'll call at least minor challenges. And I want to make it clear that the fact that somebody took the time to put all of this together, to design and develop this is actually a very impressive job. The fact that it's free to self-print, even more impressive, even more just nice to be able to have access to this. But not perfect, not necessarily perfect. I have a couple constructive pieces of feedback overall to how this all came together. The first is be very thoughtful of your material. Again, using PLA for some of this material, using your standard maybe 20% infill, not going to work for some of these pieces. They just will not have the structural stability to hold up supporting all of that weight. So consider that as you're printing your materials. Or again, for some of these, the mushroom pins and the side pins, you might want to go, if you can, resin. Go with a more solid, very dense and hard material. I mentioned earlier support. It's got a lot of support in the back. It's got the support underneath through those two mushroom pins. No support in the front. That does mean that it's got the potential to wobble. Now I did find that when I inserted the ring at the bottom, it was already leaning so much that the opening was obscure. So I had to tilt it forward and slide that piece in. On the plus side, with the piece inserted, it gives it pretty much its level and straightness to it. But just bear that in mind. It definitely is a bit front heavy, and you need to bear that in mind. Which ultimately comes down to now moving it or displaying it. So you definitely want to only lift from the base, not from the planet itself. It's got that adapter inside that could easily slip out of. And again, you got a lot of little connection points, and putting any pressure or odd pressure in certain places could cause those connection points to come off, or worse, they could break. And then, you know, you're kind of SOL at that point. But once it's fully established, once we look around and see how, even though some of these pieces are now just floating in space, they're not attached to anything on the inside, it absolutely works from a visual perspective. Absolutely works to be able to have the complete display of your Unicron in Planet Mode without the actual Unicron robot inside of it. Now, unfortunately, there is one thing missing after all of this is done, including making sure that my Unicron does not fall. Thank you. We're going to slide our Mr. Planet back. He's pretty much ready to be put back out, but now we have this beautiful, large Transformer statue, but he's missing, I think, one of his most iconic pieces, and that, of course, is going to be the arm wings, right? The ring for the planet ring converted into rings on his body. He looks, unfortunately, a bit plain, if you can believe it, without that extra accoutrement on him. So on the plus side, the same person who created the filler kit for the Planet Mode has also created some reprintable 3D wings. I'm not going to be able to show them to you. They are still in the process of printing. That process is going to take a few days. As you can imagine, they are large, they are done in sections, and I'll have a follow-up video to be able to show off our robot version of Unicron with those added wings, so that you truly, between printing the kit for the Planet Mode and then the kit for the robot mode, what do you end up with, and is it really enough for you to say, I can separate these two and really get, well, really twice the bang for my buck when it comes to being able to display them in both modes. So there's your Planet Mode kit for Unicron Haslab, as displayed here. Ultimately, I think it worked out fairly well. A couple tweaks that needed to be done that I learned along the way, and again, the key here is going to be gentle. Be gentle with the pieces, be gentle with the figure, and then be gentle anytime you're moving it. But from a display perspective, I think it works great to be able to really get the full use out of this figure, which ironically is something I kind of would have hoped we would have gotten right from Haslab with this product, but at least with the intelligent and extremely creative people out there is something that we can now do sometime later. So what do you think? Is it worthy of the time and the effort to put this together? Does it look good to you? What's your feedback? Go ahead and let us know in the comments. Hey, do us a huge favor and subscribe to continue to see all the videos that we come out with. Until then, I'm Dave Floss with Prometheus Falling Toys and Mentally Unbalanced, and I look forward to seeing you at our next video.